to go. Welcome everybody to the Explicit Instruction Academy follow-ups. And as I was saying earlier, they started in 2012 and are going in 2022. So we've had a 10-year history. And you are welcome to all of those which are available to you online. The link is in the last slide of today. So the topic is polishing your practices, equity, and I will say learning is in the details, So just a few days ago, I was asked, well, Nita, I hear you've done a few webinars during the pandemic. How many exactly? So we had on my calendar for every month at the top of it, we wrote down how many webinars I did and how many videos of teachers I watched. And I just rounded them off, but there was more than 411 actually, 400 webinars during this period of time on explicit instruction or application of explicit instruction. Boy, it's kept me up to date reading. But during that time, I also had a great gift because many of the online short courses I did on explicit instruction, we followed up by working with the administrators on observing teachers and giving them feedback that was actionable feedback on their teaching and what they could do to make a difference. And out of that, I really got an idea of how we might want to polish our practice. And luckily, the lessons that I watched, 200 videos was a lot of videos, and I'm still doing it, but they went from elementary to secondary. Some of them, just last week, I got to watch a high school lesson on trig identities. I had to go back and learn cosine and sine again. I watched one on past perfect participles, from middle school. And so I've been able to continue to learn. But across all of that, the big ideas have always stayed the same. And so our motto from our teaching, and first of all, why did I put these pictures up? This is the last time that I actually taught this live, the explicit instruction coursework in Portland, Oregon. And this year, I am doing it live. This was in 2019. This year, I'm doing it live during the Safe and Civil Schools Conference, which is going to be live in Portland from July 10th to 14th. So I just wanted you to remind, maybe you have a colleague who really wanted to go but didn't go before 2020. And so know that it is going to occur. So across that time, our motto was always, how well you teach equals how well they learn. And Roland Good one day said, Anita, you also need to teach the reverse because it's true. How well they learn equals how well you've taught. And I'm adding one today that goes with the type of active participation we need. I see in many lessons where the teacher says, think about this, or read this to yourself, or listen to me, all very covert in your head behaviors. And yet, if we don't make the engagement visible by making the responses overt, how do we know if they're paying attention? How do we know if they're processing it? How do we know if they are learning? So we have to insist on having overt behaviors. So you're going to participate, keep muted though, and read it with me and go. Every day in every class, all students are speaking, writing, and or doing. Every day in every class, all students are speaking, writing, or doing. every day in every class, all students are speaking, writing, or doing. That takes active participation right up to engagement. Engagement must be visible, and we must be able to see it. We must be able to hear it. Thus, we have to have kids not just reading and thinking and listening. We need to have them speaking and writing and doing. Well, you are going to participate. So, of course, you can take notes on best practices. Also, of course, all of the PowerPoints will be available to you. And I just redid it. So check your actual chat box for the newest version. And sometimes I'm going to have you make a short oral response. Sometimes we're going to read things together. Sometimes I'm going to read, stop, and you're going to say the next word. But at the end, you're also going to put in what is your best practice and any questions that I will ask afterwards. And if we go a little beyond 2 because I have too much to say today and you want to stick around, I'll answer your own personal questions. All right. So thinking now. So we just happened to have a photographer at our last in-person in 2019 actual Explicit Instruction Academy training in Portland. But this is to affirm what you already know, to remind you what's critical, to expand on it, and to see some application. Now, you know the elements of explicit instruction. And today we're just going to look at 13 out of the 16. But our intent is, if we did that, how might we have to polish it so it's more powerful and makes more difference across many learners? So starting right out in content. 1, do we teach critical content? Now, here is what I need to remind us to do, particularly given the cost that the pandemic has had on learning by our children. That we have to look at, I'm teaching 5th graders, I'm teaching 8th grade math, I am teaching social studies, and there may be gaps that they are missing, and we might want to accelerate them. So what do we need to do? Well, it goes right back to one of my favorite mottos of all time that you know, reading it with me, follow the cursor. Teach the stuff and cut the fluff. Never have we needed this more than now of really honing in on what is most critical. What are the most critical big ideas that students need to not forget for future learning and for application, and really focus on that critical content. And we need to, everybody reading it with me, break down new material into smaller instructional steps, obtainable chunks. And the whole purpose here by breaking it down is to set kids up for success. But I want to emphasize today and in our next webinar, which is, you're giving you a preview of that date. It'll be April 5th in March, or in April 5th. But we want to break it down to avoid cognitive overload. So that means if we're teaching a strategy with many steps, we might break it down into those steps. For example, I am teaching a book study on the writing revolution. And in that book, it's brilliantly broken down into segments that grow on each other. Students learn how to write sentences. Then they learn how to use those sentences to write topic sentences. Then they use those topic sentences in a plan that adds to it the meat of each paragraph. So we take a strategy and break it down into the steps. If knowledge is being taught, we teach a little bit, stop, and have them rehearse it and retrieve it. We teach a little knowledge, we stop. We have them rehearse it and retrieve it. And vocabulary, we limit the number of words. Well, I want to direct you to some work on cognitive overload, and know that this is going to be the topic of April 5th. That when we teach and plan to teach anything, we break it down into obtainable pieces. But what does that make us look at? Well, if you follow the research on cognitive load, you would know that there is one part that is the intrinsic cognitive load, meaning it is what we want students to learn, what we want them to think about. On the other hand, there is the extraneous cognitive load, which is anything that draws students' attention away from what we want students to learn. A digression, a very complex teaching procedure. So what's important here, and what I'm going to emphasize on April 5th, is that we know that all of us have limited working memory. And the intrinsic load, what we want them to learn and think about, and the extraneous load, which is anything that is outside of what we want them to learn that they have to attend to, like the directions or like a digression, is going to reduce their learning because it goes beyond the capacity of working memory. This is an excellent way to think about good instruction. And let me just bring out, I sort of sprinkled in here some of the examples from the more than 200 lessons I observed. But here was a discussion I had with a teacher. First of all, this is the book that we are going to utilize next time we meet. You might want to get it and reread it, pre-read it. I will tell you, it is an excellent book, but you might feel a little cognitive overload because the author is a brilliant mathematician, a mathematics teacher in Australia, and really enjoy Oliver. You should watch his podcast. But I had to study some, get some background knowledge so that I could think through his examples. But it's a small book. Here it is, Cognitive Load Theory in Action. Well, but so here's the conversation I had with a geometry teacher. And so she was teaching about the triangles and a theorem related to triangles. And she said, Anita, I always taught all this information on one day, but I realize now, after taking your course, that I better break it down and teach it segment by segment by segment so that students are not overwhelmed with too much information. So that she started with the fact that triangles have 3 sides, 3 angles, and 3 vertices, where each corner meets, where the 2 sides meet. And she said, I spent a day on that, and then I had them draw examples and non-examples and use those to prove that it was a triangle. And so the next day they knew this. And then I introduced angles. I just assumed that they knew them, but and so that if we added up the angles of a triangle, that it would be equal to 180 degrees. But I was committing a suicide. I needed to teach this and we needed to practice it. We needed to measure it, measure it, measure it, and prove it was a triangle. And then we went to one of my favorite things to teach, she said, the triangle inequity theorem, which states that the sum of any two sides of a triangle must be greater than the measure of the third side. And if you had the lengths of three sides and you added up any two and they were not greater than the third side, it could not form a triangle. But she said, again, I really learned something. I needed to break it down into obtainable pieces. Terrific example for us. Big content, teach the stuff and cut the fluff. Break it down into obtainable pieces, which you'll learn more about later. And the design of instruction. Now, you know these elements because you could go boom, 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 boom. But here we're going to focus on what we need to do to make it stronger, to ensure that everybody can learn from it, and that we would have equity across the classes. So we talk about having organized, focused lessons. So put three fingers up and tell yourself the three parts of a lesson. If we watch the whole lesson, what are the three major parts of a lesson? Okay, did you have opening, body, closing? Now, again and again, when I watch lessons, because some of these lessons I saw the whole period rather than just a part of it, what I found is exactly what you'd predict, is that the part that was missing was not the opening. Teachers who've been trained in explicit instruction got the students' attention, had a little bit of review of critical content, and did a preview stating the goal of the lesson, had a body, but no formal closing. Even a few minutes at the end of the lesson makes a difference, where we go back and review the critical content we've covered, that we tell the students what we're going to cover in our next lesson, and we might assign independent work for the class or independent work outside of class. We still need to get that little bit of closing. I had to watch my webinars because I have to tell you, Archer skipped the closing. And so I had to say to myself, Anita, follow your own prescription. And what else do we want in the design? Well, we would like, and read it with me, you know these, begin lessons with a clear statement of the lesson goals. And many schools require that the students visually show it, and that at the beginning of the lesson. However, we got to polish this up a bit, because we could do it, show the goal, and have it have no impact on learning or attention at all. We got to polish it up. And what does that mean we're going to do? Well, first of all, let's be certain that they'd understand it, that there's clarity, that it's student friendly, and the terminology is known. Now, this means that many times the statement of the goal of the lesson should come after some critical vocabulary was taught, that it really would not have meaning because they have not learned the embedded vocabulary. So it doesn't always have to be the first thing in a lesson. The teacher could say, let's go back and review this. Here's some critical terminology for our lesson. Now let's read the outcome for you. And the students need to be involved. If the teacher reads it, are they attending? It's not made overt. If the teacher and students read it together, or the teacher does close reading and the students add to it, there's more possibility the student's cognition is present. Maybe they would actually restate it, rewrite it, so that we know that they're aware of the goal and it directly relates to the content in the lesson. So often I would see a goal given, but then it didn't directly relate to the content that was then taught. And the assessment that is being done. But then the teacher needs to revisit it so that they say, so let's go back over the variables we've learned about triangles. But the biggest point was the student involvement, because just reading it to them or just sharing it or just posting it did not lead to any overt behaviors. Well, what else would we like in the opening of a lesson? Well, review. Now, I want you to tell yourself, if I was going to review what we've covered before, what kind of review is going to make the most difference? Say it to yourself. I'm hoping that you said review that actively involved the students and retrieval practice. Raise your hand if you said retrieval practice. Woo woo, good job, Alice. Excellent job, Heather. And so still we have too many recaps where the teacher's rehearsing it. The teacher is thinking about it. The teacher is overt, but not necessarily the learners. I want the students to think about it. I want the students to be retrieving it. I want the students to be actively involved in the review. So we have a little more polishing. Even though I have review in my lesson of critical content, I now need to polish it up. And we have demonstration, guided practice, and checking for understanding. So how do we need to polish up the demonstrations? So a teacher might say, watch me do this. But, which is show and tell. I'm showing you how to do it. I'm telling you how to do it. I'm breaking it down into small steps. I'm exaggerating the steps. I have clarity. But here is the major challenge I saw, is that the I do it, which is show and tell and broken down and exaggerated with clarity, needs to occur and be followed by we do it. The most common practice I saw, even after people had been participating in all of our work on explicit instruction, is I do it, you do it, versus I do it, we do it, you do it. And leaving out the we do it reduced the power of it because the students were not guided to the correct answer. So we need to do a we do it. And basically the challenge is it was missing in too many lessons. We need to reintroduce guided practice where we are really optimizing the kids' success. We are doing it with great clarity, guiding them step by step. What's the step? Now do it. What's the step? Now do it. What's the step? Now do it. And then a gradual release of responsibility until the majority are accurate, and then having support for the students who don't have it yet by monitoring them more carefully, by having them come to small group, maybe even pre-teaching so that when we got to this point, they'd have more success, or having their partners check their answers as they go. But the biggest one is let's include we do it. and in the you do it. So teachers went from I do it, but now we're going to be going to we do it, then you do it. And I'm going to check for understanding. Throughout the lesson, I am constantly checking for understanding, checking for understanding. And I'm doing it before the kids do independent practice, so I can be certain that it's going to be mostly accurate. That within the lesson, I'm going to use those checks for understanding to determine if I need to adjust the lesson. Why did I put that in bright yellow? Because oftentimes I'd see the teacher checking understanding and many kids missing it, but then the lesson not altered. The whole purpose of checking for understanding is, are they getting it? Do they understand? Do I need to adjust my lesson? I use it to decide if we're ready to move to independent practice, because I don't want high error rates on independent practice. And of course, I might say, oh, I need to reteach that. And I may need to go back to guided practice. But checking that understanding, particularly making it meaningful by then saying, let's go over that together again, adjusting the lesson. So you've got to pick up my intentionality here is that the bright yellow are the ones that I saw not consistently attended to, and thus the attribute of explicit instruction had less power. Well, delivery. Now, I am more convinced than ever that delivery of instruction, particularly active participation, is the major focus that we need to have, because it is transformative in the quality of instruction students receive. And so I am doing, in Alaska, we have some people from Alaska. I'm doing a series just on engagement as indicated through active participation. That's how dedicated I am to this area. And so we know, number one, request frequent responses. And we know it has a very high effect size, one of the highest in Hattie's work. And we know the research that as responses go up, on-task behavior goes up. As responses go up, so doth learning. As responses go up, disruptive behavior goes down. As responses go up, the intensity of interventions increases. So we know that this makes a difference. The consistent studies show the more the students are responding, the better. And so maybe you've never seen this, but I saw this again and again. So I want to remind you of this big idea. Teach, then ask. Don't ask first. Teach, then ask. Don't ask first. So watching these videos, I pulled out a perfect non-example. Now, most teachers do teach, then ask. But sometimes, I mean, I saw this all the time. Does anybody know about fractions? Has anybody heard about past participles? Can anyone tell me what step we should do next? Oh my goodness. And so this is a perfect non-example. So the teacher's teaching and says, can anyone tell me the meaning of the word precipitation? Okay. So the first child raises their hand and says, well, I bet it means you sweat too much. All right, and I'm sitting there thinking, okay, a little confusion with not precipitation, but perspiration. Okay? Next child, having heard the word precipitation, raises his hand and says, it means, I think, that you sip beforehand, you know, before, you sip before. I'm sitting there, okay. Well, he's maybe thinking pre is before, okay. And then the third child raises her hand and is called on and says, I think it is, you're really upset. You're just really upset. Well, of course, the teacher's like fishing for the answer. It would have been like such a good idea to like teach it, because now we've heard some inappropriate answers, and some students are likely to think, okay, it has something to do with sweat, versus the teacher saying, teach it with me, everybody, but be muted. And so this word is precipitation. What word? Precipitation. Tap and say the syllables in precipitation, everyone. Precipitation. Again, precipitation. Now, when rain or snow or hail falls to the ground, it is called precipitation. What is it called? Precipitation. So when rain falls to the ground, it's called, yes, precipitation. When snow falls to the ground, it's called precipitation. When hail falls to the ground, it's also called precipitation. All of them involve water falling down to the ground, called precipitation. Now, if you had, for example, a sprinkler and the water came down, we don't call that precipitation. It's not rain, it's not snow, it's not hail. So only when it comes down through nature do we call it precipitation. Well, now everybody has a chance to know it, and they have not heard inappropriate answers. But there is another danger here. If the teacher says, can anyone tell me the meaning of the word precipitation? Well, there's also a possibility a child raises their hand and said, sure, I know it. Like every day in the weather report, they talk about precipitation. It's the amount of rain we get, the amount of snow we get, or the amount of hail we get. So then the teacher makes a wrong conclusion. Well, this group already knows that I can move on. You see, there are challenges if the teacher asks, then teaches. Two errors. One is the answers could be inaccurate, or they could be very accurate, and the teacher does not give the whole group the amount of practice and retrieval and rehearsal necessary for learning. All right, so let's keep working on that. So what should we have in our active participation strategies? Number one, overt responses. Don't not just think, but you speak, you write, you do. Number two, involve everyone. Recently, I reviewed a video that is on Michigan's website by Kevin Feldman. And he talks about everyone does everything. Everyone does everything. I talk about in every class, every day, all students speak, write, and do. But I love the way he summarizes it. Or my work in Lincoln, Nebraska, which they say all means all. And it needs to be structured. Like partners need to be structured so that we can say, one, say the answers, two, say the answers. Choral responses need to be structured so that the students have a signal that say the answers. And the students need thinking time. Now, I've expanded this to preparation time. I just want to tell you what I noticed. And this is mostly in the secondary classes lessons I watched. That when the teacher had the students write down their thoughts, particularly for more complex items, before they shared with the partner or with their team or with the class, the quality of their answers went way up. And the teachers who consistently did that got no resistance from the students. It's just what we do. So when the teacher said, I want you to reflect on some of the barriers that still exist as we are studying equity across all individuals. I want you to make a list of what you would perceive as some barriers for us still having the differences in equity. Wow, the students went to work, they're writing it down, and the brilliance of their answers came through. So it's not just think, but prepare. Well, you've seen this chart many times, the different ways of having students respond. But this, I'm just going to take you through a few just to remind you of the polishing that we need to continue to work on. Yes, we could have everybody say it, but the polishing is having a clear signal so everybody says it together. Because if I just allow them to shout out, then we're going to have some kids mimicking others, not thinking of the answer. A clear signal. And we could have them say answers to partners. Now, if we said answers to partners, we would do that particularly when answers were long and different. But it needs to be structured, not just turn and talk. That doesn't give us enough control on distributing it equitably across students. We need to be able to say, one, say the answer, and two, say the answer, or A and B, or whatever designation you want. And that means teachers need to assign partners, have them already set up. I saw too many teachers who did it in the moment. Better to have it structured with assigned labels. And this one, I just remind you of how critical it is that the other partner needs a way to respond. So I say, one, say the answer. Then twos, agree or disagree. Two, say the answer. And ones, you're going to respond by elaborating on your partner's answer so that they have a way of responding. Both partners need a job, not just passivity. Remember, everyone does everything. Even as your partner's saying an answer, you're responding to it. And we need to teach them the behaviors. Look at your partner, lean towards your partner, and whisper, and changing those partners occasionally. So a little polishing, having discussions. Oh my goodness, I loved reviewing the research for my Alaska series on discussions because it appears that about consistently across studies, about 20% of the students in a classroom do about 80% of the talking during a discussion. And you would see this. So what do we need to do to polish so that we have more kids participating? And I'll tell you, it's two biggies that I saw, particularly as I watched secondary lessons. Yes, we have a question for the discussion, and it's going to be structured where I give a prompt, and this was what made the difference. When the students had to prepare by writing down their talking points, significantly more children later engaged in sharing those ideas in the discussion. And polishing it up, if the teacher went one step further and had them share it with their partner, now they've already rehearsed it. They've already practiced it. So they're much more confident. See, these are just, yes, discussions have a very high, whether it's two kids discussing or a small group discussing or a team discussing or the class discussing, has a very high effect size in Hattie's work. But if we don't take some steps, like everybody writes down their talking points, everybody shares it with their partner, not everybody's participating. So almost all of the active participation strategies we've used need a little polishing to have true participation and equity. So, of course, just say no to volunteers. Just say no to volunteers. And I always tell you, schools have really worked on this. The schools I worked with in Ohio made significant gains, particularly high school teachers who have been calling on volunteers forever, said, just say no to volunteers. And it was transformative in terms of the quality of instruction and the outcomes of students. Now, I went back and watched some videos, and here's the kinds of things to be alert to. Teachers saying, does anyone know about this? Which is basically asking for volunteers. Does anybody remember this? You know, last year you covered this. What was it? Or help me out. Tell me the next step. See, these are all ways that teachers asking for volunteers. Or raise your hand if you know. Or yesterday we covered this. Raise your hand if you remember this. Raise your hand. See, these are just alerts for you to watch for. How teachers might constantly infuse volunteers. But we know the problem. The highest performing students are going to raise their hands. And the most confident students are going to raise their hands. The most students who want to participate are going to raise their hands. And so we are going to call on a certain subset of our classroom. But the other problem I saw even more visibly is if the teacher has this as their major method, other students just abdicate. They just give up. They don't even think they have to participate. But let's think about the toll that takes. I start the school year, I'm asking for volunteers, asking for volunteers, asking for volunteers. So some students are laying back, they're opting out, they're not participating. Now we're in it 4 weeks and they haven't been doing overt responses this whole time. Now think about what they've not learned. They've not rehearsed it, they've not retrieved it. So now I've got a big problem, and that I have to go to volunteers because I've left out all these students who haven't learned it and now they can't participate. I mean, we really need to keep drumming for this. No volunteers. Hey, and so they need to have a tool of randomization, but they also just need alternative practices. And simple practices like the teacher asks a question. The students prepare their answer using a sentence stem. The students share it with their partner. Then the teacher randomly calls on students. So we still have individual turns, but it's after everyone does everything. And then that student shares the answer and the teacher, and they might request help from a partner. So there's a little safety net in the classroom. So I can say, can my partner help me with this? But constantly calling on volunteers has built into it lack of equity. Well, what else did I notice? I still have not gotten people totally convinced to do holdups. And yet, they're a miracle in classrooms. You look at the research on active participation, opportunities to respond, and you ask yourself which ones have some of the highest results in terms of outcomes. And I'll tell you, it's holdups. So I'm still working on getting people to do it. Like they hold up their slates and show so the teacher can monitor all of the students and can make a decision. Do I need to reteach? Can I go forward? They hold up their fingers in response to a multiple choice item. So the teacher has a quick They didn't have any big preparation for putting up your fingers. They could hold up response cards. Generic, agree, disagree. Specific, is it the legislative, executive, or judicial branch that I'm going to hold up? Or a response sheet, which we used in those many webinars, almost all of them. I had the teachers prepare a response chart, just like they could use in their classroom. And I would say, put it in front of you, put your finger on agree and disagree, read this statement, touch which answer it is, then hold it up. We just need to see the glory of holdups, because I can hold everybody accountable, and I will get feedback on all their answers. I even saw some teachers do this. A wonderful elementary teacher dictated a word, the kids wrote it down on their whiteboard, and then the teacher said, hold it up. And then brilliantly, she gave instant feedback. Charles, right. Okay. Look at the first letter. Say it to yourself again and change the first letter. Maria, okay, all right, and all right, and all right. Ooh, there you have just one letter that is missing. Look at it carefully. It was amazing. But here's the most common error I saw in terms of holdups. Whether it was holding up the slate, the teachers often had the students write on the slate and the kids held it immediately up, but I saw children looking at other people's slates and fixing their answers or writing their answers, or multiple choice. The kids, as soon as they figured it out, put their fingers up, and then other kids just looked over to the highest performing kids and mimicked it. The main thing is, no matter what, let's say it's a response sheet. Teacher gives a directive, and the students touch the answer, they don't hold it up. Teacher monitors that and then says, show me, and they hold it up. The main problem was too many kids were holding it up before they were given a directive, and thus they were just mimicking someone else. See how the little practices polish it. And so then they hold it up and the teacher gives feedback. Well, we also want to monitor. Isn't this kind of fun? Just to think and how much of it reinforces what you've noticed. So monitoring. So the delivery skills we work on in explicit instruction is I get many responses and I monitor. I carefully monitor. I listen carefully. I look carefully, and I circulate when needed. But, and I might, when I circulate, attend to particularly struggling students. But I also need to be certain when I circulate that I monitor all students consistently. And we saw teachers doing this. I walk around, I look around, I talk around. Stan Payne's routine that we've learned. But when we looked at the videos, we found that many teachers did not end up monitoring all. They might monitor 4 kids in the front row consistently, or they always went to the right side of the room, their dominant side, but didn't monitor the students on the left side. So oftentimes we ended up writing down a actual seating chart. And then when the teacher went to that desk and monitored, we put an M on it so we could trace the monitoring to see if any students were left out. And so, but they could monitor for academic responses. Are they understanding the task? Monitor for behavior. Monitor for, are they finishing the task so I can move on? It's a very mindful activity to, if you ask a question, to constantly monitor their response. But then the second thing we need to be certain is we are adjusting the lesson. If many kids miss it, I've got to reteach it. If many students have strong responses instantly, woo, I can move on. And of course, they will also give feedback. Affirmative feedback, informative feedback, corrective feedback. Oh, have my eyes been opened about the importance of feedback? I mean, it already consistently has a high effect size, no matter which summary of research you're looking at, or which year you're looking at Hattie's work, high effect size. And so we want, after each opportunity to respond, we want feedback to be provided to the students. And it needs to be clear. And it could be to the entire group, or if I'm circulating and monitoring, it could be to individuals, which I will then do it quietly and privately. I just have to tell you one thing that we had to remind many teachers of is when you give a directive, and then you move out to monitor, you should not continue to talk over the group. And some teachers had to go back and watch their video and say, oh my gosh, I did that. So they would say, now, please do the next algebraic equation problem and be certain that you show all of your work. Now the teacher's given clear directions. You're supposed to do the next item and show your work. And then they start monitoring. And we hear them saying, okay, I see some of you need to have numbers that I can read with ease. Don't forget, everybody's got to be able to read your numbers. Okay, as I watch over here, I see that some of you aren't showing all of your work. Be certain that all the steps are there. That means you need to label your answers. Some of your answers aren't labeled. Oh my God. And then the kids don't know what they should be doing. Should I be listening to the teacher or attending to my work? The teacher needs to just say no to continue giving additional advice. I mean, if you really see a problem again and again and again, say pencils down, eyes up here, and then go over it again. Okay, so the teacher is getting responses and giving feedback. Affirmative feedback. Praise. We happen to know that we should give it for behavior, for academics, and some recent studies have shown that, particularly in terms of behavior, affirmative praise is very useful. Because we have some teachers say, oh, I wouldn't praise high school kids, but it appears if you want certain behaviors in your class, you should. But what I noticed was a lot of good job, thank you, excellent, but not always an affirmation plus behavior. Thank you, everybody arrived on time. We can start class now. Oh, that's even more powerful when we have the affirmation and the behavior. And then as we're monitoring individual students, we might, or to the whole group, we might give informative feedback, which basically says how you could improve the response. Now, informative feedback, particularly if it's given to individuals, could differ. So I saw one teacher do this beautifully. And so as I watched the video, the teacher went out to monitor and she was quiet, but we had her mic so I could hear it. And the students were writing a paragraph and it was either in 4th or 5th grade. I got to go watch the video again. She came to the first child and said, excellent, you have the topic sentence and all the other details relate to it. Beautiful. Now I want you to go back and add 2 or 3 transition words that will make it easier for the reader to understand. Next child. Excellent, you've got the topic, you have the critical details, but you know, once again, I can barely read it. So remember, you're working on having your printing be legible. Remember, right on the lines. Totally different informative feedback for that child. So it needs to directly relate to what I have taught, and it needs to be very clear. And some teachers occasionally would give feedback with like this. Now, we haven't really talked about this ever in class, but I just want to show you here how you could have combined these two sentences and made it much more sophisticated by using an appositive. I know we haven't learned it yet, but here's what an appositive is. I mean, there you are struggling to just do what you've been taught. And now someone is giving you feedback on something that you haven't been taught. Just say no to that because instruction, and read it with me, instruction is more powerful than feedback. But here's what I've really learned, and that is on corrective feedback, on corrections. Now, some of you know that I have utilized, and I'm still working on it, the pandemic being at home to do a total revision of one of the programs I wrote in 1984, Phonics for Reading. Now, it's been revised numerous times, but this is a big revision connecting all of the outside research on teaching phonics to struggling readers. So I was in conversation with my colleague, who I wrote rewards with, and other intervention programs, Mary Gleason. I said, Mary, help me out on corrections. And she said, Anita, you know, I did studies on corrections. I said, no, I didn't. I mean, we've been colleagues and best friends for 30 years, and I didn't know this. And she said, yes. And here's what we learned. I want you to follow this. This is a big tip. She said, oftentimes we taught teachers that if the students made an error, that what we should do is then immediately guide them through the steps to the correct answer. So for example, if they mispronounce a word, we might say, let's sound out that word together and then say the word. Or maybe if they had a math problem that they left out a step, let's go back and do this one together. I'll guide you through the steps. So they compared in their studies that procedure of guiding the students to the correct answer. And in the second situation, they told the students the correct answer first, then guided them through the steps that would get them to that point. Well, what was the outcome? When they said the answer and then guided the students, and then they knew where they were going, significantly better outcomes in terms of learning. So it reminds me to change all of my correction procedures where the students make an error. I'm going to tell them the correct response, have them repeat it, and then I'm going to redo the original question or the original item with the student or with the whole group. See, I can learn after 55 years of teaching, I can learn new things all the time. And brisk pace, oh, you know, I was able to see the brilliance of teachers. You know, you watch 200 teachers and you're very impressed with our profession. But teachers who just flowed through the lesson, why did they flow? They were prepared. Why did they flow? They had no digressions. Why did they flow? They knew exactly what they wanted the students to learn. And so it was sort of a way to see the brilliance of their lessons, prepared. They used routines. Students knew what to do. They knew what to do. They got a response. They moved on. They didn't have a lot of verbosity and they avoided digressions. But particularly when I saw teachers who digressed, oh, this reminds me of this. Oh my goodness. Took all their cognitive energy away from what we wanted them to learn. So the students had less learning in those lessons. So you see, every one of our good practices can be polished just a little bit, including having practice. And you know the big ideas in practice. It needs to be enough practice so it gets into permanent memory. And that means we're going to have deliberate practice in the lessons, we're going to have retrieval practice, and we're going to have space practice over time. Now, I'm hoping that this polish lesson will be of use to you and to those you're working with. And this is a summary of the 13 elements that we just went through. And now, while I am talking, you can put your best practice. What was the takeaway that you remembered here? But a little more information for you. One, people always ask me, what are you reading? What should I read? Well, I've already suggested that you might want to get this little book on cognitive overload, but no, the last half of it, you're going to have to get a little outside background knowledge to be able to reduce your own cognitive overload. It's an excellent book. And Oliver podcast, he is Australian. Podcasts are excellent. I did one for it was perfect in Australia. Here's the that I at this moment, because in so many of our schools, instead of wanting to use explicit instruction, teachers want to use inquiry. And what this book did, in a very easy to read way, looked at the arguments on both sides and the research on both sides, and came to the conclusion, the power of explicit instruction and direct instruction. Okay, so those are my two reads. And this, in case you don't have it and you've lost it, here is the link again to all of these sessions, all of these webinars. So you could go back and read the topics, and maybe one of them would be useful for some group that you're working with. And you have permission to totally utilize them, because dissemination is always my goal. And the last little reminder before we have question and answer is that our next webinar is on April 5th. I did not choose this date randomly. On that day, I am 75 years old. So you're going to come and we'll have virtual cake and ice cream. And I can't wait, because I will have real cake and ice cream on that day. But I'm going to dedicate it to the topic of cognitive overload and about intrinsic and extrinsic cognitive load, and how that theory fits totally in to explicit instruction. Very exciting. All right, but right now I want everybody to open up their cameras, and I'm going to show all of us. If you are there, you can open up everybody. So cameras open so everybody can see the beautiful people that are with us. And see, we got friends here that were training with you. Deborah's still in her car driving. Don't pay too much attention to us. Tend to that road, Deborah. And it is just like a total gift. Tara, welcome to you. Wendy, good to see you again. Amy, what a delight. Aren't we blessed? Carol, excellent job in California. Great to see you. And never has there been a time when we needed to keep working on quality instruction, quality instruction, quality instruction. To me, it is the biggest answer that we need to focus on in light of all of our discussions about equity, because it is those polishing that makes it equitable, that everyone has an opportunity to learn at their highest level. So now, if you need to leave, we would welcome that. If you want to stay for a few minutes to respond to questions, just open up your voice and ask a question. And I will be glad to respond to those now. So any question, just open it up. And I see Carol, go.
I want to know more about your book because I always recommend it. And if it's coming out soon, then we'll wait. So,
Sweetheart, thank you very much. So Carol knew that Charles and I were starting the effort of revising the book on explicit instruction. And so her question is, when is it going to be done? Well, since I have been working on phonics for reading, which has affected the lives of thousands and thousands and thousands of children, I'm going to do that first. And so just yesterday, Carol, odd that you would ask this, I negotiated a little bit later date for it to come out. And so this is when it goes to them, the publishing company. It's going to them in October 2023. Okay. Okay. And here's the challenge right now, Carol, is usually that would be about after they received it. It would be definitely for sale at least within 3 months. Now, with the shortage of paper and so forth, we're having difficulty for companies meeting that. But no, that's when it's going to them. So right now, the book is good. The book is really good. There's not a lot of new things, but there's whole new chapters we're adding, a little bit longer, more examples. I mean, you don't sit around and watch 200 teachers teach and not want to revise your book.
right.
So yes, we're going to be doing revisions, and I am so blessed by this time period because, you know, I watch a lot of teachers teach, but not 200 of them. Yeah. So this is really, it has informed me about what do we need in terms of polishing.
Great.
Right. Thank you so much.
Thanks,
Carol. So continue using it till I let you know better, but I've got to have it to them in October 2023.
Great.
Okay. And the next question, just open up and ask. Or a comment. Okay. I don't see anybody yet, but boy, don't we have a great group of people here.
I've heard you talk about the birds outside of your window, so it's cool to actually hear them today.
Thank you, thank you. And yes, so I've got outside beautiful crows. That's the big one right now, but I also have woodpeckers right now, right in the tree. Maybe you heard them. So yes, and I have an owl in the backyard. So, you know, there is always gifts. Everything gives us gifts. This I'm not traveling every week. I'm here. And I was able to talk to more people about explicit instruction in the pandemic than I would have ever done in person. Now, isn't that a gift? And not only that, over this time, I have my gardens. Some of you have been to my home in Portland if you came to the explicit instruction trainings that I did here. But now I own another property behind my house that's gardens. And so there's 3 lots of gardens. So I'm just like in the middle of the city. So I'm totally blessed. So there's things, but this has been a great time for learning for me. I've never, you know, I have hundreds of books that I have read over this time. So my library just grows and I'm constantly challenged by it. Hope you noticed that there were some new things. Raise your hand if there was something that you were reminded of or learned. Because if not, you might have to come back for the remedial session tomorrow. Okay, anybody else?
I have a question.
Yes.
So I'm a title coordinator, and we at our school, at the middle school, use your old phonics for reading. When does the new one come out?
So it'll be out, the phonics for reading program, which will be even more adapted to your situation of older students, will be out for summer school in 2023. So, and that is giving the fact that some of the challenges of having paper and materials that are needed, so it'll be either that date or earlier.
Okay, and then my second question, we also use rewards for more of the middle school students and the phonics
Yes.
for reading. What my question is, the parts of the lesson are pretty embedded in those programs. You know, you have constant review, you have the vocabulary review, and you have the sounds, of course, repeating a lot. So there's a lot of practice in there.
Yes.
How do our teachers really practice the 3 parts of a lesson when it's so embedded? I find that they just tend to, me included, I mean, I've taught it too, where I just open the book, all right, we're on part G, you know what I mean, or whatever, and you just kind of start. So
That's quite appropriate though, because it is embedded. I mean, that's one of the things that Mary, Dr. Gleason, and I were very concerned about, was infusing as much explicit instruction in all of our materials, because, and this is really important in intervention materials particularly, because you could have a checklist on, did it teach the students like letter sound association? Did it teach them short vowels? Did it teach them prefix? Did it teach them suffix? Did it teach them? And you could check those off, but not having enough practice, not enough explicit modeling, not enough guided practice, not enough space practice. So that is what that's why it takes us so long to write the materials, is the fusion of those every detail. Now, Tara, when you start, and maybe you taught a lesson that you didn't finish up, and so you're going to go back and start with activity B in it. Every lesson says for that a very brief goal. It says you're going to say the sounds for these letters. You are going to say prefixes. So that announces for every segment the goal. And so I do not see any challenge with it, but yes, it looks a little bit different than because it's more of a continuous flow. So you're right on, Tara, excellent question. So raise your hand if you have any others, or just open up. All right, yes.
I have a quick question. My name is Kendra Fields, and I'm an instructional coach in Klamath Falls, Oregon.
In Klamath Falls, Oregon,
Yeah.
how much I love Klamath Falls.
So I tomorrow am giving a training to teachers on opportunities to respond.
Excellent.
Just a quick hour training. What would be one thing that you wouldn't want me to leave out?
So first of all, you email me, and I'll send you the first one that I did for Alaska last week.
Okay, I actually am using your video from rewards because I thought the one on
modeling,
that's the one I chose because it's a quick hour. The only thing I did notice that you didn't address in there, which I do want to add in, is the holdups. Because I thought about that after you mentioned it today. I thought, oh yes, that's a great one to add in for the action,
Right. And so you got it, you're already all set, but you go through, be certain that the big ideas of, you get lots of responses, they need to be overt.
Yeah.
And that everybody does everything. And that you are going to give them time to prepare. So going through those big ideas. So you email me and I'll send you those, so you can even use the slides that at the first part of that PowerPoint.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you. Well, does anybody else? Then I'm just going to say it was.
I have one more question, actually.
Excellent, Tara.
I'm sorry,
I don't mind at all.
Take over, but I have another question. So with middle school students, and of course all the pandemic effects that have had on everyone, there are just huge gaps in the area of not only word attack but also in comprehension. So one of the questions that I have that I'm struggling with is how to, like, typically you would want to make sure that they can read the words accurately before you work on comprehension. So in a reading intervention class, would you say that even now it would be better to finish the rewards program in full, go as quickly as reasonable so the students can actually access it, and then move into comprehension instruction? Of course, it includes vocabulary instruction, but I'm talking more like with longer, more difficult stories, more written practice. Do you see what I'm saying? Or do you slow down the rewards and spend part of the class doing that and part of the class doing the other?
So here's, first of all, you might want to go back and re-watch the one that I did on comprehension is not a strategy, but comprehension is an outcome, and these are the 4 things that are necessary for the outcome of comprehension: that you can read the words accurately and fluently, that you understand the meaning of the words, that you have the necessary background knowledge, and the 4th one is that you focus in on the critical content. Now, if you have students in middle school, which 80% of the students in middle school who are assigned to intervention do not have facility in reading the words accurately and fluently. Now, here is the thing. It is easier to heal that deficit than it is comprehension, because comprehension requires you can read the words, you know the meaning of the words, you have background knowledge, and you are focused on the critical content. So my feeling is that I would want to heal that as much as possible. And there's passages that as the goal in rewards, but then move to longer passages where you pick out the difficult words and utilize the reward strategy on those. You picked out the difficult vocabulary they might need, and you would teach those. That you would give them the necessary background knowledge, and then you would read the passage, and then you would provide a lot of, with all 4 present, very much like the last passages in rewards, because that's exactly what we do. We teach them, here's the difficult words, let's practice the pronunciation, here's meanings of critical words, here's background knowledge you need, now let's read the words, and I will stop, I will read, stop, respond. And when we read a little bit, we'll stop, I'll ask a question and you'll respond. And then doing that again and again and again. You know, comprehension, in fact, if you watch, one of the things that you just helped me remember, Tara, is that I also attached an article that I didn't want you to miss on revisiting comprehension and the power of knowledge in terms of comprehension. So that is one of the attachments that was sent out to you. Okay, so read the CATS article on comprehension. Well, okay, Lynn, do you have any questions? You always do. My friend from Ohio.
I usually do, not this evening. I've been listening to everyone else's though and learning along lots of new things since I last saw you.
That's why what we need to do, learn and grow, right? Well, I'll see you on April 5th, and we will talk about cognitive load. Pretty interesting. Yes, bye-bye, guys. Take good care of you, whether you're in Oregon, Hawaii, or Ohio, or New Mexico. Yay. Bye to all of you.